When my son got married, I never told him I had inherited my late wife's $22 million Colorado ranch. Thank God I kept my mouth shut. Because exactly 7 days after I paid for his extravagant wedding, his new wife walked into my living room with a notary, a polished smile, and a legal document designed to leave me entirely homeless. My name is Walter Brooks. I am 71 years old, and for 40 years of my life, I owned and operated a small 3-bay mechanics garage in the western suburbs of Chicago. I am not a complicated man. I have always believed that you get out of this world exactly what you are willing to put into it with your own 2 hands. I wear faded flannel shirts because they are warm. I drive a 12-year-old Ford pickup truck because the engine still runs perfectly, and my hands are permanently stained with motor oil and grease. I have never cared about looking wealthy. I have never cared about impressing people who judge a man by the label on his jacket rather than the calluses on his palms. But my late wife, Eleanor, came from an entirely different world. Eleanor was a woman of quiet, terrifying grace. She was born into a family that possessed old, deeply rooted money in Colorado. Her grandfather had purchased over 2,000 acres of pristine land nestled right up against the mountains. It was not just dirt. It was a massive, sprawling estate with exclusive water rights, prime horse-breeding pastures, old-growth timber, and a gorgeous, weathered log cabin sitting right in the center of it all. By the time Eleanor passed away, the property line practically bordered a highly exclusive, ultra-luxury ski resort. Developers had been circling the land like vultures for a decade. The current appraisal of the ranch was $22 million. Eleanor could have married a banker, or a lawyer, or a man who wore custom Italian suits. But for reasons I will never fully comprehend, she chose the mechanic from Chicago, who fixed her alternator on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. We were married for 38 years. When Eleanor got sick, she knew she did not have much time left. She also knew exactly how the world worked. She knew what massive amounts of money could do to a family. Before she passed, she placed the entire Colorado ranch into a brutally strict, irrevocable family trust. She made me the sole trustee, giving me complete and total legal control over the property. She did not tell our son, Evan, about the true value of the land. She told me to keep it a secret. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her frail hand. She looked at me with those sharp, clear eyes and said, "Money doesn't ruin people, Walter. It reveals them. If Evan chooses love, give him a home on that land. If he chooses greed, protect this land from him." I promised her I would. I just never wanted to believe that I would actually have to keep that promise. Evan was a good kid growing up. He used to sit in the garage with me on Saturday mornings, handing me wrenches and drinking cheap sodas from the vending machine. I taught him how to work hard. I paid for his college degree, hoping he would build a solid, honest life for himself. But somewhere along the line, Evan changed. He went to work in corporate finance downtown. He started wearing expensive suits, leasing cars he could barely afford, and speaking in a language I no longer recognized. He started looking at my garage not with pride, but with a subtle, unmistakable embarrassment. And then he met Marissa. Marissa was 31 years old, stunningly beautiful, and possessed a specific kind of aggressive, polished ambition that made me instantly uneasy. She wore designer clothes, carried expensive handbags, and spoke to service workers with a sweet, condescending tone that set my teeth on edge. She was the kind of woman who viewed every interaction as a transaction, constantly evaluating whether a person was useful to her upward mobility. When Evan brought her home to my modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, she looked around the living room as if she were inspecting a mildly interesting museum exhibit of poverty. "Walter," she said, offering me a brilliant, entirely fake smile. "Evan has told me so much about you. It is so charming how you have kept everything exactly the way it was in the 1990s. I smiled politely and offered her a cup of coffee. I did not like her, but she was the woman my son had chosen to marry. and a father's job is to be supportive. When they got engaged, Marissa made it very clear what kind of wedding she expected. She did not want a quiet ceremony in a local church. She wanted a sprawling, extravagant event at a historic downtown hotel. She wanted imported white orchids, a 12-piece live band, a 5-course plated dinner, and a custom designer gown. Evan came to my house, sat at my kitchen table, and asked me to help pay for it. He didn't ask for a small contribution. He asked me to cover the majority of the cost. He told me it would secure his future, that Marissa's social connections required a certain level of presentation. I knew it was foolish. I knew it was a massive waste of money. But he was my only son. His mother was gone, and I wanted to see him happy on the most important day of his life. I went to the bank, dipped heavily into my retirement savings, and wrote a check that covered the flowers, the venue, and the band. I did not touch a single dime of the Colorado Trust. I paid for it with the money I had earned turning wrenches for 40 years. The day of the wedding was a spectacle of absolute excess. The ballroom of the hotel looked like a movie set. There were massive ice sculptures, towers of expensive champagne, and hundreds of guests wearing tuxedos and evening gowns. I rented a standard black tuxedo. I felt entirely out of place, an old mechanic standing in a room full of corporate executives and socialites. Marissa played her part perfectly. When she saw me, she hugged me in front of the photographer, calling me her wonderful new father. But I noticed the microaggressions. When it was time for the primary family portraits, I was smoothly directed by the wedding planner to stand off to the side, ostensibly to make room for Marissa's large, wealthy extended family. I spent most of the evening sitting at a table near the back, watching my son laugh and drink with people whose names I did not know. It was around 11 o'clock at night when the music got too loud for my old ears. I slipped out of the ballroom and walked down a quiet, carpeted hallway toward the restrooms, just looking for a few minutes of silence. The hallway was dimly lit and mostly empty. Halfway down the corridor, there was a small alcove with a decorative seating area. As I walked closer, I heard a voice. It was Marissa. She was speaking in a low, intense, highly serious tone. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still behind a large potted fern, completely hidden in the shadows of the hallway. Marissa was not alone. She was standing with a tall, sharp-looking man in a tailored gray suit. I recognized him from the reception line. He was a high-end commercial real estate consultant, a man who specialized in developing luxury resorts for the ultra-wealthy. The timeline has to be aggressive, Marissa was saying, her voice stripped entirely of the sweet melodic tone she used in public. It was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient. The old man is living alone in a house in the suburbs. He is holding on to assets he doesn't even understand. The consultant took a sip of his drink. Are you sure about the Colorado land, Marissa? That property is highly restricted. It has been locked up for decades. Marissa let out a short, dismissive laugh. I did my research. Eleanor's family owned over 2,000 acres right next to the new ski resort. It is worth over $20 million. Walter is the sole trustee. He is a mechanic. David, he doesn't know what to do with a luxury equestrian retreat. He probably thinks it's just a place to park his rusty truck. My heart stopped beating. The blood in my veins turned completely to ice. I stood frozen in the shadows, listening to the woman my son had just married casually discuss stripping me of my dead wife's legacy. How do you plan to get control of the trust? The consultant asked. Step 1 is the Chicago house, Marissa said smoothly. Once the old man signs over control of his medical and financial directives for the house, we establish a legal precedent that he is incapable of managing his own affairs. Once Evan has legal guardianship, Evan will be able to prove he is the natural heir to the trust. Then, we go after the Colorado land. We dissolve the trust, take the acreage, and break ground on the retreat by next spring. I felt physically sick. I wanted to step out from behind the plant. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, to throw her out of the hotel that I had paid for. But before I could move, a door opened at the end of the hallway. It was Evan. He was wearing his custom tuxedo, holding a glass of scotch. He walked down the hallway and stepped into the alcove with his new wife and the real estate consultant. I held my breath. I waited for my son to ask what they were talking about. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for the boy who used to hand me wrenches in the garage to look at this woman and tell her that his father was not a target to be acquired. Evan took a sip of his scotch. He looked at the consultant, then looked at Marissa. "Just don't rush him too hard," Evan said. His voice was calm, completely devoid of surprise. He already knew. Dad still thinks family means something. If you push the legal papers too fast, he'll get suspicious. We have to make him think giving up control is his idea. The silence that followed was the heaviest, most agonizing silence of my entire life. It was worse than a knife to the chest. If Marissa had been acting alone, I could have handled it. She was a greedy, ambitious woman, and the world is full of them. But Evan knew. My own son, the boy whose wedding I had just financed with my life savings, was actively collaborating with his wife to declare me incompetent and steal his mother's legacy. I did not step out of the shadows. I did not yell. I did not confront them. I turned around and walked silently back down the hallway, retrieved my coat from the front desk, and walked out into the cold Chicago night. I drove my old Ford pickup truck back to my quiet, empty house in the suburbs. I did not turn on the lights. I walked into the living room and sat down in my worn leather armchair. I looked at the framed photograph of Eleanor sitting on the mantelpiece. She was smiling. Standing in front of the old log cabin in Colorado, the mountains rising majestically behind her. I sat in the dark for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I realized then that the boy I had raised was gone. He had been consumed by the very thing his mother had feared. They thought I was just a tired old mechanic. They thought I was an easy mark, a stepping stone to their wealthy future. "Money doesn't ruin people, Walter," Eleanor had told me. "It reveals them." I looked at her photograph. My heart was broken, fractured into 1,000 irreparable pieces. But beneath the overwhelming sorrow, a cold, hard resolve began to solidify in my chest. I was not going to give them the Colorado ranch. I was not going to give them my house. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to let them think they were winning. I was going to let them build their arrogant, fraudulent little empire. And then I was going to tear it down so completely that they would never recover. The trap was already set. I just had to wait for them to knock on my door. For 7 days after the wedding, I did not hear a single word from my son. No phone call, no text message, no casual drop-in to tell me about the honeymoon. I spent that week in the quiet solitude of my house, living exactly the same way I had lived for the past 40 years. I woke up at 5 in the morning, brewed a pot of cheap black coffee, and spent the mornings working in my garden or fixing minor things around the property. My life was simple. My needs were practically non-existent. But the silence from Evan was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I knew what he and Marissa were planning. I had heard it with my own ears in the dim hallway of that hotel. I just did not know when the attack was going to happen, or what form it would take. I got my answer exactly 1 week later, on a brisk Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my worn leather armchair, reading the local newspaper, when I heard the distinct sound of tires crunching on the gravel of my driveway. I looked out the front window and saw a pristine, black luxury SUV parked behind my old Ford pickup. Evan stepped out of the driver's side. He was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful corporate executive he had fought so hard to become. Marissa emerged from the passenger side, dressed impeccably in a beige cashmere coat, holding a leather portfolio. But they were not alone. A third person stepped out of the back seat, a middle-aged woman wearing a conservative gray pantsuit, carrying a black briefcase. I did not need an introduction to know who she was. I recognized the sharp, professional efficiency of a notary public. I folded my newspaper, set it down on the side table, and took a slow, deep breath. The trap was moving. The gears they had put into motion in the hotel hallway were finally grinding forward to crush me. I stood up, smoothed out the front of my faded flannel shirt, and walked to the front door. I opened the door just as Evan was raising his hand to knock. "Dad," Evan said. His voice was slightly too loud, carrying a forced, artificial cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced." He did not look me directly in the eye. His gaze flickered to the collar of my shirt, then passed me into the living room. "Come in," I said quietly, stepping aside to let them pass. Marissa walked in first. She immediately took control of the room, bringing the distinct smell of expensive perfume into my modest home. The notary followed quietly behind her, standing respectfully near the doorway. "Walter," Marissa said, offering me that same brilliant, entirely manufactured smile. She walked over and placed a manicured hand gently on my arm. "It is so incredibly good to see you. We missed you at the brunch the day after the wedding." I hadn't been invited to the brunch. I knew that. She knew that. It was a calculated opening move, designed to establish the fiction that she cared about my presence. "I was tired," I said simply. "What brings you both all the way out to the suburbs on a Tuesday afternoon?" Marissa sighed, an exaggerated, theatrical sigh designed to project deep emotional concern. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, patting the cushion next to her for Evan to sit. Evan sat down stiffly. He looked like a man preparing to endure a highly uncomfortable dental procedure. "Walter, we are here because we are worried about you," Marissa said. Her voice dropped into a soft, melodic register. It was the exact tone an adult uses when trying to coax a stubborn child into doing something unpleasant. "Evan and I have been talking a lot lately. We look at this house, and we look at you living here all by yourself, and it breaks our hearts." I remained standing. I folded my arms across my chest and looked down at her. "There is nothing wrong with this house. I have lived here for 40 years. "And you have maintained it beautifully," Marissa said quickly, pivoting without losing her rhythm. "But Walter, you are 71 years old. The stairs are steep. The winters here are brutal. What if you slip on the ice? What if something happens and you are all alone?" She unzipped the leather portfolio, resting on her lap. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, bound with a black clip, and set them gently on the coffee table between us. "We found a wonderful community," Marissa continued, gesturing toward a glossy brochure she slid next to the legal papers. "It is a highly respected assisted living facility about 2 hours west of here. The staff is incredible. You would have your own small room, hot meals prepared for you, and 24-hour medical supervision. It is a place where you can finally rest, Walter. You deserve to rest." I glanced at the brochure. I recognized the name of the facility. It was not a luxury retirement community. It was a state-subsidized, bare-bones nursing home located in a desolate, forgotten county far away from Chicago. It was a place where families sent their elderly relatives when they wanted them out of sight and out of mind. I looked at the thick stack of legal documents. "And what are these?" The notary stepped forward slightly, clearing her throat. "Mr. Brooks, these are standard comprehensive power of attorney and medical directive forms. They are designed to transfer legal control of your assets, your real estate, and your medical decisions to your designated proxy." I looked back at Marissa. "You want me to sign over my house? We want to protect you." Marissa corrected, her voice tightening just a fraction. The sweet facade was starting to show tiny hairline cracks. "Managing a property like this, dealing with property taxes and maintenance, it is too much of a burden for an elderly man. If you sign the power of attorney, Evan can manage the sale of the house. We can use the equity to secure your spot at the facility. It is the most responsible thing to do." I did not respond to her. Instead, I turned my attention entirely to my son. Evan was staring at a scuff mark on the hardwood floor, His hands were clasped tightly together between his knees. His knuckles were white. "Evan," I said. My voice was low, carrying the heavy, undeniable authority of a father speaking to a child he raised from birth. He slowly lifted his head. For the first time since he had walked through the front door, he met my eyes. "Son," I asked him quietly, "did you know she was bringing this today? It was a test. It was the final, desperate test of a father hoping against all reason that his son still possessed a shred of morality. I was offering him an out. I was giving him the opportunity to stand up, look at his wife, and tell her that this had gone too far." Evan swallowed hard. The silence in the living room stretched out, heavy and suffocating. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. I watched the internal struggle play out across my son's face. I saw the guilt. I saw the shame. For one brief, fleeting second, I thought the boy who used to hand me wrenches in the garage was going to win. I thought he was going to tell the notary to leave. But the fear of his ambitious wife and the intoxicating lure of the money he thought he was about to acquire was stronger than his conscience. Evan looked away from me. He looked back down at the floor. "Dad," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Marissa planned this because she cares about you." It was a cowardly answer. He was hiding behind her, refusing to take ownership of the betrayal. "I am not asking what Marissa thinks," I said, my voice hardening. "I am asking what you think." Another long, agonizing silence. Marissa shot Evan a sharp, warning glance. It was a look that communicated a clear threat. "Do not ruin this." Evan finally looked back up at me. His eyes had changed. The guilt was gone, replaced by a cold, corporate pragmatism. He had made his choice. "I think she is right, Dad," Evan said. His voice was stronger now, steadier. "You are getting older. You are living in the past. We need to be practical about the future." The words hit me with the physical force of a physical blow. The last tiny ember of hope I had been holding onto was instantly extinguished. He was not a victim of his wife's manipulation. He was a willing participant. He was actively choosing to discard the father who had sacrificed everything for him, all for the equity in a 3-bedroom suburban house. He had no idea that he was actually trying to steal the keys to a $22 million kingdom. He thought this house was the only prize. Marissa let out a sharp, impatient breath. The facade of the sweet, caring daughter-in-law completely dropped away. "Walter, let's be honest," Marissa said, her tone suddenly brisk and transactional. "This house is entirely wasted on you. You sit in that old chair all day. You have no social life. You are sitting on value that you don't even use. Evan and I are trying to build a future. We need capital. We have opportunities that require liquidity. And you are selfishly hoarding an asset that could change our lives." There it was, the absolute, unvarnished truth. They did not care about my health. They did not care about a brutal winter or steep stairs. They cared about the equity. They wanted to liquidate the only home I had left to fund their extravagant lifestyle. And they were willing to put me in a state-run nursing home to do it. "You are sitting on value you don't even use, Dad," Evan echoed, parroting his wife's corporate jargon. "We are just asking you to help us build our future, like a father should." I looked at the son I had raised. I looked at the woman he had married, and I realized that Eleanor had been entirely, devastatingly right. Money doesn't ruin people. It reveals them. And the people sitting in my living room were strangers. They were ruthless, greedy strangers who viewed my existence as nothing more than a minor obstacle to their own wealth. "Sign the papers, Walter," Marissa commanded, pushing the stack of documents across the coffee table toward me. She picked up a heavy silver pen and held it out. "The notary is waiting. Let's make this easy." I looked at the silver pen. I looked at the thick stack of legal documents that would strip me of my independence, my home, and my dignity. I slowly reached my hand out. Marissa's eyes lit up with a greedy, triumphant fire. She thought she had won. She thought the tired old mechanic had finally surrendered to the aggressive, polished machinery of her ambition. She thought she had broken me. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the pen, and then my hand began to shake. I did not fake a massive, theatrical heart attack. I simply let my hand tremble violently. I allowed the pen to slip from my fingers and clatter loudly onto the hardwood floor. I slumped forward slightly, clutching my left hand over my chest, breathing heavily through my nose. Evan jumped up from the sofa. "Dad, are you okay?" Marissa did not move. She stared at the fallen pen with a look of pure, unadulterated frustration, annoyed that my physical failing was interrupting her transaction. I waved Evan away, forcing my breathing to remain shallow and erratic. "I'm fine," I wheezed, keeping my head down. "It is just my eyes. The print on those papers, it is too small. Everything is blurry." I slowly stood up, leaning heavily on the arm of my leather chair for support. I played the part of the weak, confused old man to absolute perfection. "I need my reading glasses," I mumbled, avoiding their eyes. "They are upstairs, on my nightstand. Give me a minute. I need a minute to find my glasses." "I'll go get them, Walter," Marissa said quickly, already halfway out of her seat. She wanted this done now. She did not want to give me a single second to reconsider. "No," I said, my voice suddenly sharp, stopping her in her tracks. I immediately softened my tone, reverting back to the frail old man. "No, Marissa. I know exactly where they are. You wouldn't be able to find them. Just wait here." Let an old man catch his breath. I turned my back on them and walked slowly, unsteadily toward the staircase in the hallway. I placed my hand on the wooden banister and began the slow climb to the second floor. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I could hear the silent communication passing between them in the living room below. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was simply going upstairs to fetch a pair of glasses so I could sign away the rest of my life. But as soon as I reached the top of the stairs, out of their line of sight, the trembling in my hands stopped entirely. My breathing steadied. The posture of the frail, broken old man vanished, replaced by the cold, calculated precision of a man preparing for war. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, stepped inside, and quietly locked the heavy wooden door behind me. They thought they had cornered an old mechanic in the suburbs. They had absolutely no idea that they had just forced the hand of a man who held the keys to a $22 million empire. And I was about to unleash a storm that would shatter their entire world. The moment the heavy wooden door of my bedroom clicked shut and the lock engaged, the charade was over. I did not lean against the doorframe, gasping for air. I did not clutch my chest. The trembling in my hands vanished entirely. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the muffled sounds of Evan and Marissa talking in the living room directly below me. I could not make out the exact words, but I could hear the cadence of Marissa's voice. It was sharp, urgent, and victorious. I walked over to my nightstand, picked up my cell phone, and dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. It rang twice before a voice answered. It was a deep, gravelly voice, carrying the precise, unhurried cadence of a man who charges $1,000 an hour for his time. "Walter," Jonathan Mercer said. "It has been a while." Jonathan Mercer was not just a lawyer. He was a legal architect who specialized in ultra-high net worth trust and estate litigation. He was the man Eleanor had hired to construct the impenetrable legal fortress surrounding the Colorado ranch. He was ruthless, brilliant, and entirely devoid of sentimentality. "Jonathan," I said quietly, keeping my voice low so it would not carry through the floorboards. They made their move. I heard the sound of a pen tapping against a desk on the other end of the line. The son and the new wife? Yes. They are sitting in my living room right now with a notary. They brought standard power of attorney and medical directive forms. They want control of the house, my accounts, and legal guardianship. A classic opening maneuver, Jonathan noted, his tone entirely clinical. If they secure guardianship, they establish a legal precedent that you are mentally incompetent. It is the first necessary step to challenging your position as the sole trustee of Eleanor's estate. Can they touch the Colorado Trust with these papers? I asked. Absolutely not, Jonathan replied immediately. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Eleanor anticipated this. The irrevocable family trust she established is effectively bulletproof. As long as you are alive, no one can authorize the sale, transfer, or commercial development of that land without your explicit, notarized signature. And because the trust is domiciled in Colorado, an Illinois guardianship order over your personal finances is insufficient to breach it. They are trying to pick a bank vault with a paperclip. What happens when they realize the papers they brought today are not enough? I asked. They will hit a massive legal wall, Jonathan said. The only way they can gain control of the Colorado land without your consent is if they produce a verified amendment to the original trust document. An amendment explicitly transferring the trustee position to Evan. An amendment that does not exist, I stated exactly. Which means, Jonathan paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air, if they want that land as badly as you suspect they do, they will have to manufacture one. They will have to forge Eleanor's signature, and they will have to forge yours. If they do that, Walter, they are no longer just greedy children. They are committing a massive, multi-million-dollar federal felony. They will be engaging in criminal fraud. I closed my eyes. The reality of what was happening settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Eleanor knew this might happen. Walter, Jonathan said gently, breaking his usual cold professionalism for just a fraction of a second. She loved Evan, but she saw the changes in him before she died. She built the trust this way so that he could never accidentally lose the ranch. If he wants to take it, he has to actively choose to break the law. She wanted to force his hand. I know, I said. My voice was thick with an unspeakable sorrow. I just never wanted to believe it. What do you want me to do, Walter? Jonathan asked. Nothing, I said. My eyes opened, and I looked at the framed photograph of Eleanor sitting on my dresser. Do not file any injunctions. Do not contact them. We are going to let them play out their hand. Understood, Jonathan said. Call me when you are ready to drop the hammer. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the dresser and picked up Eleanor's photograph. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp, full of the ancient, quiet wisdom that had always anchored me. Promise me you won't tell Evan about the ranch until he shows you who he really is, she had said to me in her hospital bed. The test was failing. The boy I had raised had failed. But there was still one final boundary he had not crossed. There was still a chance he would pull back before he destroyed his own life. I set the photograph down. I walked to my closet and pulled out a battered, faded leather suitcase. I did not pack clothes. I packed the things that actually mattered. I packed the certified original copies of the Colorado Trust documents. I packed the hard drive containing the recordings from the discreet security cameras I had installed in the house years ago. I packed the printed copies of the emails Marissa had sent to the commercial real estate consultant, which I had legally obtained through a private investigator earlier that week. And finally, I packed the sealed letter Eleanor had written to Evan, the one she had entrusted to me to deliver only when the time was right. I closed the suitcase, leaving it on the bed. Then I walked back out into the hallway and slowly descended the stairs. Evan and Marissa were waiting exactly where I had left them. The notary was still standing by the door, looking slightly uncomfortable. The legal documents and the silver pen were still sitting on the coffee table. Marissa looked up as I reached the bottom step. Her eyes darted to my hands. "Did you find your glasses, Walter?" she asked, her voice tight with barely suppressed impatience. "I did," I said. I walked slowly back into the living room, standing behind my leather armchair. I did not sit down. I looked at Marissa. Then I looked at Evan. "I found my glasses," I repeated, my voice dropping the fragile, wheezing tone I had used earlier. "And I read the paperwork. Actually, I didn't need the glasses. I know exactly what these documents are. Evan shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. Marissa's eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine anger breaking through her polished exterior. "Walter, do not make this difficult," Marissa said sharply. "We have the notary here. We are doing this for your own good. If you refuse to sign these, we will be forced to take this to a judge and prove that you are incapable of making rational decisions. You do not want a messy, public court battle." It was a direct threat. She was threatening to drag me through the court system, to humiliate me, to force me out of my own home. I ignored her completely. I looked only at my son. "Evan," I said, "look at me." Evan hesitated, then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. "I am going to ask you this one last time," I said quietly. The weight of 34 years of fatherhood was compressed into that single sentence. "I am your father. I taught you how to walk. I taught you how to hold a wrench. I paid for your college, and I paid for the wedding you just had. I am asking you right now to tell this woman to pack up her papers and leave my house." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the precipice, the point of no return. Evan was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I was holding my hand out to pull him back. Evan looked at me. His face flushed a dark, angry red. The corporate pragmatism vanished, replaced by the ugly defensive rage of a man who knows he is doing something horrific, but lacks the moral courage to stop. "No, Dad," Evan snapped, his voice rising, harsh and defensive. "I am not telling her to leave. She is right. You are holding us back. You are sitting in this dusty old house, living in the past, while we are trying to build a future. If you sign these papers, we can finally move forward. And if I don't?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Evan stood up from the sofa. He crossed the space between us, standing just a few feet away from me. He looked down at me, using his height to try and intimidate the man who had raised him. "If you walk away from this," Evan said, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of anger and greed, "then you walk away from me. You walk away from us. And when Marissa and I have children, they won't even know your name. You will die alone in this house, Dad. Sign the papers." He had used the ultimate weapon. He had threatened to erase me from the future of our family. I looked at him. I did not see my son anymore. I saw a hollow, greedy shell of a man, entirely consumed by the ambition of the woman standing behind him. The heartbreak I felt was profound, a deep, physical ache in the center of my chest. But the heartbreak was entirely eclipsed by a cold, absolute clarity. Eleanor's test was over. Evan had chosen his path. "Then I finally understand what I am to you," I said softly. I turned away from him. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I walked past him, past Marissa, and headed back up the stairs. "Walter!" Marissa yelled after me, her voice shrill with frustration. "Where are you going?" "The notary is waiting." I did not answer her. I walked into my bedroom, picked up the battered leather suitcase from the bed, and walked back out. But before I left the room, I made sure to leave something behind. On the bottom shelf of my open closet, partially hidden under an old blanket, I had carefully placed a large, heavy cardboard box. Written on the side of the box in thick black marker were the words, "Eleanor, trust drafts." It was the bait. I walked back down the stairs carrying the suitcase. Evan and Marissa stared at me in stunned silence as I walked straight past them toward the front door. "What are you doing?" Evan demanded, stepping into the hallway. "Where do you think you are going?" "I am leaving," I said, opening the front door. "You want the house, Evan? You can have it. But I will not sign a single document for you or your wife. If you want what is mine, you are going to have to find another way to take it." I walked out the front door, down the steps, and out into the driveway. Behind me, I heard the heavy wooden door of my own house slam shut. I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a loud final click. My son had locked me out of the home I had built for him. I walked over to my old Ford pickup truck, opened the door, and tossed the leather suitcase onto the passenger seat. Through the large bay window of the living room, I could see them. Evan and Marissa were standing in the center of the room. Marissa was smiling. She walked over to the small, wet bar in the corner, pulled out a bottle of champagne she must have brought with her, and popped the cork. She poured 2 glasses, handing one to Evan. I could not hear their words through the thick glass, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were saying. The old man broke faster than I expected, Marissa would be saying, her eyes shining with triumph. And my son would be raising his glass, clinking it against hers, saying, "To our future." They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully intimidated a weak, old mechanic into abandoning his home, leaving everything behind for them to pillage. I started the engine of my truck. The old V8 rumbled to life. I looked at the house one last time. I looked at the 2 silhouettes drinking champagne in the living room. They thought I was leaving with nothing. They thought I was retreating in defeat. They had absolutely no idea that inside the leather suitcase on the seat next to me was the legal, unassailable power of a $22 million empire. And they had no idea that the cardboard box I had left in the closet was a meticulously designed trap. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the driveway. They thought I was leaving with nothing. I said quietly to myself, the sound of the engine drowning out the pain in my chest. They didn't understand I had just given them enough rope to hang themselves. For the next 6 weeks, I lived in a small, quiet apartment on the other side of Chicago, watching my son dismantle his own life from a distance. The security cameras I had installed in my old house were completely undetectable. They were originally put in years ago to monitor the front door and the driveway while I was away at the garage. But they also covered the living room and the main hallway. Through a secure connection on my laptop, I watched Evan and Marissa turn my home into the staging ground for their own destruction. It took them exactly 3 days to find the bait. I watched the black and white feed as Marissa practically tore my bedroom closet apart. She was looking for bank statements, deeds, anything she could use to solidify their control over my assets. Instead, she found the heavy cardboard box pushed to the very back of the bottom shelf. Through the audio feed, I heard her drag the box into the center of the bedroom. Evan walked in a moment later, holding a cup of coffee. "What did you find?" Evan asked. Marissa ripped the packing tape off the top of the box. She pulled out a stack of manila folders, her eyes scanning the handwritten labels. "Eleanor," Marissa read aloud, her voice tightening with a sudden electric excitement. "Colorado trust drafts." She dumped the contents of the folders onto my bed. For the next 3 hours, I watched them sift through the paperwork. What they were looking at were highly complex. Preliminary legal drafts that Jonathan Mercer had drawn up nearly 2 decades ago. They were incomplete, unsigned, and entirely legally void. But to a greedy, ambitious woman looking for a loophole, they looked like a treasure map. Marissa found exactly what I had wanted her to find. A single unexecuted draft summary that suggested if the primary trustee, me, was deemed incapacitated or stepped away, the natural heir, Evan, would automatically assume total control of the Colorado acreage. "Evan, look at," Marissa said, holding up the piece of paper, her hands practically shaking. "This land, it isn't just a family farm. Do you realize how close this property is to the ski resort? This is prime commercial acreage. It's worth tens of millions of dollars. And your father has been sitting on it like a stubborn old mule." Evan took the paper. He stared at it for a long time. "It says the transfer only happens if he is incapacitated. He didn't sign the medical directive." "Marissa, we don't have guardianship. We can't touch it." Marissa paced across the bedroom floor. Her mind was working at a terrifying speed. The legitimate path was blocked. I had refused to sign the papers. But the allure of a $22 million prize was too massive for her to walk away from. She had tasted the money, and she was not going to let a legal technicality stop her. "We don't need guardianship," Marissa said slowly, stopping in the center of the room. If your mother was preparing to transfer the trust to you anyway, then we just need to execute her wishes. We just need the final amendment. Evan frowned. What amendment? She died before she finished these drafts. Marissa looked at my son. The silence in the room was chilling. I watched the realization slowly wash over Evan's face. He understood exactly what she was suggesting. We need a trust amendment, Marissa repeated, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. Dated before her death. Signed by her, and signed by your father. You want to forge their signatures? Evan asked. His voice was higher than usual, laced with genuine panic. Marissa, that is a federal crime. That is massive fraud. If we get caught by who? Marissa interrupted fiercely, stepping closer to him. Your father is a mechanic who abandoned his own house because he was too stubborn to take our help. He doesn't even understand the value of what he has. He is living in the past, Evan. He is hoarding your mother's legacy while we struggle to build a life. Do you think this is what your mother would have wanted? For you to be a corporate drone while a $20 million estate rots in the mountains? Evan looked down at the papers on the bed. It was the second time I watched my son stand on the precipice. It was his second chance to pull back. He knew it was wrong. He knew that crossing this line meant moving from greed into outright criminality. Maybe this is too far, Marissa, Evan said, his voice trembling. Maybe we just sell the Chicago house and walk away. We are not walking away from our future, Marissa said. She placed her hands on either side of his face, forcing him to look at her. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She was using his grief, his ambition, and his love for her to push him off the cliff. Your mother wanted you to have this, Evan. I know she did. We are just correcting a paperwork error. We are taking what is rightfully yours. Evan closed his eyes. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then he nodded. I sat in my dark apartment, staring at the laptop screen, and felt something inside of me permanently break. He had crossed the line. There was no going back now. The descent into criminality happened with terrifying speed. Marissa was incredibly efficient. She didn't use a standard lawyer. She reached out to a dirty notary she had met years ago in the real estate business, a woman who was willing to overlook discrepancies for a significant cash payout. Marissa printed a flawless, legally binding trust amendment using the templates she had found in my box. I watched through the camera as they sat at my kitchen table 2 days later. Evan held a pen. He had a stack of old birthday cards and legal documents I had left behind, carefully studying my signature and his mother's signature. He practiced on a blank sheet of paper 20 times, 30 times, and then my son leaned over the fraudulent trust amendment, and he forged his dead mother's signature. He moved his hand down the page, and he forged mine. The notary, sitting across from them, stamped the document, collected an envelope of cash, and walked out the front door. It was done. They had officially committed a multi-million-dollar felony. Armed with the fraudulent amendment, Marissa unleashed her ambition. She reconnected with the high-end commercial real estate consultant I had seen her with at the wedding. She presented the forged documents, proving that Evan was now the sole legal trustee of the Colorado estate. They drafted a massive, glossy pitch deck for a project they called the Brooks Legacy Retreat. It was a proposal for an ultra-luxury equestrian resort, featuring private villas, a high-end spa, a polo field, and a massive event space for wealthy weddings. Because the property bordered the ski resort, the land value alone was enough to make investors salivate. Within 3 weeks, using the forged trust documents as collateral, Marissa and Evan secured $3.8 million in initial seed funding from a private equity group in Chicago. The money hit their accounts, and the transformation was instantaneous. They did not use the money to quietly build the business. They used the money to build an image. I watched through the cameras as Evan returned the leased sedan and drove up to my house in a brand new, 6-figure imported sports car. Marissa began wearing clothes that cost more than I used to make in a month at the garage. They threw a lavish launch party at a rooftop bar downtown, charging thousands of dollars in champagne to their new corporate account. They hired an elite architectural firm. They paid massive retainers to construction management companies in Colorado. They ordered heavy machinery to be moved to the edge of the property line. They were moving at a breakneck pace, desperate to break ground before anyone could question the foundation of their empire. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, my cell phone rang. It was Jonathan Mercer. "I have the financial reports from the private investigator," Jonathan said, his voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. "They secured $3.8 million in funding. They used a forged trust amendment to do it. The notary's stamp is registered, but the signatures are fraudulent. We have the video footage of Evan signing the documents from your security cameras. We have the bank transfer records." "It's over then," I said quietly. "It is more than over," Jonathan replied. "Walter, we have enough evidence right now to walk into the federal prosecutor's office and have them both indicted for wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery. We can freeze their accounts by tomorrow morning. Do you want me to file the injunction?" I walked over to the window of my apartment and looked out at the rain falling on the Chicago streets. I thought about Evan standing in my living room, telling me I was going to die alone. I thought about him sitting at my kitchen table, carefully tracing the signature of the woman who had brought him into this world, using her name to steal her legacy. "No," I said. Jonathan paused. "Walter, if we let them proceed, they are going to start tearing down the property. They have heavy machinery mobilizing in Colorado." "Let them mobilize," I said, my voice hardening into stone. "If we stop them now, in a courtroom in Chicago, they will hire expensive defense attorneys. Marissa will claim it was a misunderstanding. She will claim I gave them verbal permission. She will try to spin the narrative." "You want a public execution," Jonathan noted. It wasn't a question. He understood exactly what I was doing. "They used my wife's name to steal $3.8 million from private investors," I said. "I do not want them to just lose a court case. I want the people who gave them that money to be standing in the room when the floor collapses. I want them to put their names on the crime in front of an audience. Let them build the stage." "Understood," Jonathan said. "I will prepare the necessary parties in Colorado." 2 days later, the email arrived in my inbox. It was a mass invitation, sent out to the private equity investors, the architects, the contractors, and a select group of wealthy socialites Marissa had cultivated over the past month. The subject line read, "You are invited." The groundbreaking of the Brooks Legacy Retreat, the email, detailed a highly orchestrated event scheduled for the following Friday morning at the ranch in Colorado. They had hired a boutique catering company. They had hired a small media team to film the event. They were planning to stand in front of Eleanor's old log cabin, raise a glass of champagne, and order the bulldozers to tear it down to make way for their luxury spa. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the glossy digital invitation. I looked at the logo they had designed. I looked at my son's name listed at the bottom under the title Founder and CEO. I reached across the table and picked up the framed photograph of Eleanor. "They're not building a legacy, Ellie," I whispered to the empty room. "They're walking into a grave they dug themselves." I closed my laptop, stood up, and went to the closet to pack my bag. I had a long drive to Colorado, and I needed to be waiting on the porch when they arrived. The air in the Colorado mountains on a late October morning carries a distinct, sharp chill. It is a clean, unforgiving cold that cuts right through your clothes and settles deep into your bones. I sat in a weathered wooden rocking chair on the front porch of Eleanor's old log cabin. I was wearing my heavy flannel jacket and holding a mug of black coffee. I looked out over the sprawling 2,000 acres of my late wife's family legacy. The frost on the tall grass was slowly melting under the pale morning sun. To my left, the massive, Jagged peaks of the Rockies rose into the sky, casting long shadows over the prime horse-breeding pastures. It was breathtakingly beautiful. It was entirely peaceful, and it was about to become a war zone. I checked my watch. It was 8:45 in the morning. I was not alone on the property. Sitting inside the cabin behind me, drinking coffee by the wood stove, were Jonathan Mercer, the local county sheriff, a federal financial fraud investigator, and a highly specialized forensic document examiner who had flown in from Denver the night before. We did not have to wait long. At exactly 9 o'clock, the quiet rumble of heavy diesel engines began to echo through the valley. I watched as a convoy of vehicles turned off the main county road and headed up the long, winding dirt driveway toward the cabin. It was a procession of absolute arrogance. First came two black luxury SUVs carrying the private equity investors who had funded the $3.8 million. Behind them was a sleek silver Mercedes, driven by Evan. Following the cars was a massive flatbed truck carrying a yellow bulldozer and two large catering vans. They parked in the wide clearing just 50 yards from the cabin. The doors opened, and the invaders stepped out onto my land. Evan and Marissa emerged from the Mercedes. Evan was wearing a highly tailored, expensive overcoat, looking like a young billionaire surveying his new kingdom. Marissa was wearing knee-high leather boots and a designer wool wrap, holding a clipboard like a general leading a conquering army. They were surrounded by a small entourage, architects holding rolled-up blueprints, a videographer setting up a camera on a tripod, and a group of wealthy investors murmuring appreciatively at the breathtaking view of the mountains. I did not stand up. I did not say a word. I simply sat in my rocking chair, holding my coffee mug, and watched them. Marissa was busy directing the caterers to set up a champagne table near the edge of the pasture. She turned toward the cabin and finally noticed me sitting on the porch. She froze. The clipboard in her hand dropped slightly. She tapped Evan on the shoulder and pointed. Evan turned, his confident smile evaporating instantly when he saw the old mechanic sitting on the porch of the multi-million-dollar estate he thought he had successfully stolen. Marissa quickly recovered her composure. She whispered something to the lead investor, forced a brilliant smile, and marched toward the cabin, with Evan following nervously a few steps behind her. They stopped at the bottom of the wooden steps leading up to the porch. "Walter," Marissa said. Her voice was sharp, laced with a dangerous mixture of surprise and profound irritation. "What are you doing here?" "I am drinking my morning coffee," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off her. Evan stepped forward, puffing his chest out slightly, trying to project the authority he thought he now possessed. "Dad, you need to leave. You shouldn't have driven all the way out here. We have an incredibly important corporate event happening today. We have investors here." "I know," I said. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I was expecting them. Marissa's eyes narrowed. She looked at the old, weathered logs of the cabin, then looked back at me with absolute disdain. "Evan, call security at the front gate and have him escorted off the property," Marissa commanded, no longer bothering to maintain the facade of the caring daughter-in-law. She turned to one of the architects standing nearby, who was holding a blueprint. She pointed directly at the cabin. "That old cabin goes first. Tell the bulldozer operator to tear it down immediately. It ruins the entire view of the valley." That was it. That was the final, unforgivable sin. She wanted to tear down the home where Eleanor had spent her childhood, the place where we had spent our honeymoon, just to improve the sightline for a luxury spa. I set my coffee mug down on the small wooden table next to my chair. "You should have asked who owned the land," I said, my voice cutting through the crisp mountain air like a gunshot, "before you invited cameras to watch you steal it." Marissa let out a harsh, condescending laugh. "We know exactly who owns the land, Walter. Evan is the legal trustee. You are an incapacitated old man who is currently trespassing on private commercial property." "Am I?" I asked. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned my head slightly and nodded toward the heavy wooden door of the cabin. The door opened. Jonathan Mercer stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing an impeccably tailored dark suit, holding a thick leather folder. He was followed immediately by the county sheriff, fully uniformed, with his hand resting casually near his duty belt. Behind the sheriff stepped the federal fraud investigator and the forensic document examiner. The blood drained from Marissa's face so fast, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Evan took a physical step backward, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. He recognized the sheriff. He recognized the devastating reality of what was standing on the porch. The investors, sensing the sudden, drastic shift in the atmosphere, stopped talking and began walking slowly toward the cabin. "What is this?" Marissa demanded, her voice rising in a panicked shrill. "Evan is the trustee. We have the amended trust documents. We have a notarized signature." Jonathan Mercer walked to the edge of the porch, looking down at Marissa and Evan with the cold, detached expression of an executioner reading a sentence. "My name is Jonathan Mercer," he said, his voice projecting clearly across the clearing, ensuring that every single investor and architect could hear him. "I am the senior managing partner of Mercer and Vance, and I am the primary legal counsel for the Eleanor Brooks Irrevocable Family Trust." He opened the leather folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "The trust amendment you used to secure $3.8 million in commercial funding," Mercer stated, "is a complete fabrication. It is legally void." "That is a lie," Marissa shrieked, turning toward the investors who had now gathered behind her. "He is an old man. He has dementia. He doesn't know what he is saying." Mercer ignored her completely. He turned his attention directly to the lead investor, a wealthy man from Chicago who was now staring at Evan with a look of dawning horror. "Sir," Mercer said clearly, "the documents Mr. Brooks provided to your firm were forged. We have the forensic analysis confirming that both Walter Brooks's and Eleanor Brooks's signatures were manually traced. Furthermore, we have high-definition security footage of Evan Brooks actively forging those signatures at a kitchen table in Illinois." A collective gasp rippled through the group of investors. The lead investor's face turned an ugly shade of purple. "You told us the title was clean," the investor snarled, stepping toward Evan. "You told us you had full legal authority. We transferred $3.8 million into your corporate account." "It is a fraud," Mercer confirmed loudly. "This property is, and always has been, under the sole, unassailable legal control of Walter Brooks. He has never authorized a commercial transfer. You have invested millions of dollars into a criminal enterprise. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic." The lead investor pulled out his phone, screaming at his legal team in Chicago to freeze the accounts immediately. The architects began rolling up their blueprints, backing away from Marissa and Evan as if they were radioactive. The videographer quickly stopped recording and began packing up his equipment. The entire multi-million-dollar luxury retreat evaporated into the thin, cold mountain air in less than 60 seconds. Marissa began to hyperventilate, the polished, aggressive ambition completely shattered, leaving behind a terrified, desperate woman. She looked frantically at the sheriff, who was now walking slowly down the steps of the porch. She turned to Evan. "Tell them," Marissa screamed, shoving Evan in the chest. "Tell them it was your idea. You forged the signatures. You told me it was legal." Evan stared at his wife, his face pale and sweating. The woman he had betrayed his own father for was now actively throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. "Me?" Evan shouted back, his voice cracking. "You found the papers. You brought the notary. You forced me to sign it." The sheriff reached the bottom of the stairs. He did not yell. He did not draw a weapon. He simply pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Evan Brooks, Marissa Brooks," the sheriff said calmly, "you are both under arrest for multiple counts of forgery, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy." Evan's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the cold, frosted grass. He looked up at me, standing on the porch of the cabin he had tried to tear down. "Dad," Evan sobbed, the tears streaming down his face. He wasn't a corporate executive anymore. He was just a terrified, broken boy. "Dad, please, please tell them." "I didn't want to do it. She made me do it. She pushed me." I walked to the edge of the porch and looked down at my only son. I felt a profound, devastating sorrow. I had won the war, but the cost was astronomical. I had protected the land, but I had lost the boy who used to hand me wrenches in the garage. "No, Evan," I said quietly, my voice carrying over the sound of the wind in the pines. She opened the door. "You walked through it." I turned my back on him and walked into the cabin, closing the heavy wooden door behind me. I did not watch as the sheriff placed my son in handcuffs. I did not watch as they loaded Marissa into the back of a police cruiser. I did not watch the investors speed away in their luxury SUVs. The aftermath of that morning was a brutal, drawn-out legal massacre. The federal prosecutors were entirely merciless. Marissa was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for orchestrating the fraud. Evan, who had physically forged the signatures, received a 5-year sentence. The dirty notary lost her license and faced her own criminal charges. The private equity firm sued Evan and Marissa into absolute, generational bankruptcy, seizing their cars, their clothes, and every dime they had left in an attempt to recover the $3.8 million they had foolishly spent. The Brooks Legacy Retreat was entirely erased from existence. Several months later, the first heavy snow of the winter began to fall over the Rocky Mountains. I was sitting in my rocking chair on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. The valley was completely silent, buried under a pristine blanket of white snow. The ranch was safe. The land would remain exactly as it was, protected by the ironclad trust, untouchable by the greed of developers or the ambition of a fallen sun. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out the sealed envelope I had carried with me in the leather suitcase from Chicago. It was the final letter from Eleanor. I broke the seal with a trembling hand and unfolded the heavy, cream-colored paper. Her handwriting was elegant, even as her strength had been fading. "My dearest Walter, T," the letter read. "If you are reading this, it means the test is over. I am writing this to you knowing how heavily your heart must be breaking. You were always the best of us. You always saw the good in people, especially our son. But I knew the world he was entering, and I knew what that kind of money could do to a soul that wasn't anchored to the ground. If our son chose love, I know you gave him a place here. But if he chose greed, I know you protected this land from him. And if protecting it broke your heart, Walter, please know that I am so deeply sorry for asking you to be strong one more time. You are the only man who could carry this burden. Protect the land, protect your peace, and know that I love you. Forever." Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into my pocket. I looked out at the towering peaks of the mountains, my vision blurring with hot, silent tears. I had kept my promise. I had won the battle. But sitting alone on the porch of a $22 million estate, I had never felt poorer in my entire life. I never told my son I inherited his mother's ranch, and thank God I didn't. Because in the end, silence was the only thing that protected everything she loved from the boy we once trusted.